21:22. Okay, well, there's just a treaty between Avimelech and Avram Avinu. One interesting thing about this is that they call the place Beersheba. Take a look in 21:31. Because of the covenant that they make with the 7 sheep, Vayichrusu bris Beersheba, and they called that the name of that place Beersheba. So before, it already was called Beersheba in the days of Avram Avinu. What this is the days of Avram Avinu. It was called Beersheba the first time they made a covenant. So why is it called Beersheba? Kisham nishba'u shneim, for they took an oath there. So there's 2 things. There was the 7 sheep that were used to consecrate the treaty, and then there was the oath that they took not to wage war one against the other, Avimelech and Avram Avinu. The reason it's called Beersheba is not because of the 7 sheep that were used to consecrate the covenant or the treaty, but because of the oath. So in a sense, it's telling us that your word is more important than what you did to make the treaty. If you gave your word not to wage war, that is what establishes the name for Beersheba. Now, the next episode is the Akedah. We're going to skip the Akedah for the moment. We'll maybe come back to it again. We want to go to... We're going to skip the story of Rivka and Eliezer because I also have a whole approach to that story, and we'll have to skip that. I want to get to Perek Chof Vav 26 Pasuk Aleph. Now, do we do this before? Vayeira Yaacov Baaretz, there was a hunger in the land. Now we're talking about in the life of Yitzchak, when he dwelled in the land of Israel, a hunger struck. And the pasuk tells us, Milvad hara'ov harishon, besides the first hunger, Ashahaya b'mei Avraham, which took place in the days of Abraham. This is a very strange pasuk. Why does it tell us that this is besides the hunger that happened in the days of Avram Avinu? When did that hunger happen in the days of Avram Avinu? It happened as soon as he came to the land of Israel. When he was 75 years old, he was greeted with a hunger, which is one of the tests that Avram Avinu had to undergo. God tells him, get up and uproot yourself and come to the land of Canaan and the land of Israel. And as soon as he gets there, a hunger strikes. So Avram Avinu was 75 when that hunger struck. Yitzchak is born when he's 100, so that's 25 years later. Yitzchak bears Yaakov and Esav when he's 60. So 25 plus 60 is 85 years later. Esav and Yaakov are 15 years old when Esav comes starving from the field, and Yaakov purchases the birthright. He barters the birthright with Esav. So that's 55 plus 15 is 100. So this hunger is 100 years plus after the first hunger. And now the Torah is telling us, don't get confused between the 2 hungers. This is besides the first hunger. Now, who would get confused between the 2 hungers? If you had a hunger that extended for 100 years, there would be nobody in the land. It would be like a dust bowl. It would be like just nobody there. Nobody could live 100 years in a hunger. So what is the Torah telling us? Don't get confused. Of course we're not going to get confused. Nobody in his right mind would think it's the same hunger. Then the next question we have to ask is, what happened in the first hunger? Avram Avinu picks himself up, leaves the land of Israel, and goes to Egypt. Well, why did he do that? The Canaani, the Chiti, the Amori, the Prizi, the Yebusi, the Girgashi, all of the Canaanite nations that dwelled in the land of Israel at that time did not pick themselves up and run to Egypt in the middle of this hunger. They stood fast. They, what we would call in Hebrew, Hemechaziku Mamad. They stood their ground and weathered the hunger. So why didn't Avram Avinu weather the hunger? Why did he have to run to Mitzrayim? So what happens here in verse 2? God appears to Yitzchak, Vayomer al tered Mitzrayim. Do not go down to Egypt. Don't follow in the footsteps of your father. Your father in the first hunger in the land of that 100 years earlier ran to Egypt. You stay put. Stay in this land which I have given to you. Gur ba'oretz hazo. Stay here, dwell here. And I will be with you and I will bless you, because this land I've given to you and to your seed, and I will establish my oath that I swore to your father. Okay, fine. So now Hashem tells Yitzchak to stay put. What does Yitzchak do? He goes, Vayeshev Yitzchak begror. He therefore goes to Avimelech. He cannot leave Israel because Hashem told him not to leave the land. So here he is in the middle of a hunger. Hashem tells him not to go down to Egypt. We asked why Avram Avinu went to Egypt. We should ask, why did Yitzchak intend to go to Egypt? And God stops him and tells him, stay put. So what does he do? He goes to live with Avimelech, the king of the Pelishtim, which is by Aza, we're fighting over now, by the Mediterranean Sea, which is part of the land of Greater Israel. If so, that Yitzchak was able to stay in the land of Israel during this hunger, why didn't Avram Avinu go to Avimelech, the king of the Pelishtim, and stay there too? Why did he run to Egypt? Okay, so we have the question, why did he go to Egypt? The Canaanite nations didn't run to Egypt. Why does Yitzchak want to go to Egypt? Why didn't Avram Avinu, after God told Yitzchak to stay put and stayed in the land of Pelishtim, why didn't Avram Avinu go to the end of the Pelishtim? Those are questions that we have. So let's take a look at what happens next. Okay, Avimelech comes, it's a little bit, but let's take a look at verse 13. Vayigdal ha'ish, Yitzchak becomes great. Vayelech holoch v'godel al kigodel ma'od. He becomes very great. What does it mean becomes great? He becomes very wealthy. Vayhilo miknet sonu mikne boker. He has flocks of sheep and flocks of cattle. Vavudo rabbah, and many young, calves, etc. Vayikanu also Pelishtim. The Pelishtim, Yitzchak Avinu has so many cattle and animals, etc., and he's so wealthy that the Pelishtim begin to get jealous of him. Okay, now we take a look at Pasuk Tesvav. When Avraham Avinu passed away, all of the series of Be'eros that he had dug, the Pelishtim filled them up, they sealed them, and they filled them with dirt. Did the Pelishtim need well water? No. They closed off and sealed off all the wells of Abraham and filled them with dirt because they didn't need well water. And Avimelech tells Yitzchak, go, lech mi imanu, go away. My people are becoming too jealous of you. You're too wealthy. So Yitzchak goes and he dwells in the valley or the stream by Gror. Vayoshev, Pasuk Yud Ches, 18. Vayoshev Yitzchak v'yachbor es be'eretz hamayim asher chafru b'mei Avram aviv vayisatmu Pelishtim achrei mos Avram. And Yitzchak goes and he has his servants reopen all of the wells that the Pelishtim had sealed and filled with dirt. Yitzchak reopens them and he begins to use those wells. And he even calls them the same names that his father ascribed to those wells. Now, is there any complaint from the Pelishtim? No, they don't care. He opens up all the wells of Abraham, no problem. They don't need well water. That's why they sealed them. Now that Yitzchak's back in the area, he opens them up and there's no complaint. Take a look at Pasuk Yud Tes. And so the servants of Yitzchak go and they dig another well and they open up a new well. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks out, and the Pelishtim are fighting against Yitzchak's shepherds, and they say, Lonu hamayim, it's our water. What are you opening up a new well for? This water is ours. So when Yitzchak reopens all of the be'eros of Avram Avinu, not a peep out of the Pelishtim. He opens one, he digs one new well, and they start fighting over it. So what does he do? He leaves them that well, and he goes and he digs another well in a different location, somewhat further away from them. Vayachru beracheres, he digs another well. Vayorivu gamaleh, they fight over this also, this one well. Take misham, he distances himself from there, he uproots himself, and he moves away. So what is he doing? He's leaving all the wells of Avraham behind him. He's leaving that area to dig one well. All the wells of Avram Avinu were not enough for him, but he abandons them and he digs one more well. What is he doing? And he calls this well Rechavia. This is where perhaps today we have the city of Rechavia. And he stays there. So what's going on here? He seems also to have an abundance of water, or he digs this one more well and he leaves behind all the wells of Avram Avinu. So what's going on? How many wells? Well, why did he need one more well? And if he needed more water, why did he abandon all the wells of Avram Avinu for one well? And if the Pelishtim needed water, why did they let him open up all the be'eros of Avram Avinu? Why did they seal them if they needed water? If they didn't need water, why did it bother them so much if he digs one more well? So these are questions. And another question. Who cares about these wells anyway? You know, he had wells, he had this, he had that. Maybe he went to and went to super farm. What do I care what Yitzchak did with wells? Why do wells have anything to do with the history and the destiny of Am Yisrael? Okay. Now we're going to take a look at the next chapter. The next chapter is 27. It opens up with Yitzchak's eyes failing him. And this is the chapter which deals with the blessings the blessing that Yitzchak gives. And we have an overwhelming question. Why would Yitzchak prefer to give the blessing to Esav instead of to Yaakov? Now, people will say, oh, he was old. Oh, he couldn't see so clearly. We're talking about where Yaakov and Esav are 60 years plus. Yitzchak's eyes began to fail him in his old age. He raised these two sons from the day they were born until they're 60 plus years old. He had an opportunity to fully understand the nature of his son Esav. He had an opportunity to fully understand and appreciate the nature of his son Yaakov. He is a Navi. He is a prophet. He is a patriarch of our people. How do we understand that Esav could fool him, pull the wool over his eyes, and he did not see the true essence of Esav? And in fact, he didn't even see the true essence of Yaakov. How is this to be understood? This is mind-boggling question. How could Yitzchak Avinu, the prophet and patriarch, have preferred Esav over his son Yaakov? Okay. Now let's get into the story of the blessings, and let's see how the wells are connected to that story, and let's see why Yitzchak would have preferred Esav. So we take a look now in chapter 27. Yitzchak calls his son Esav in, as Beno HaGadol, his older son, and he says to him, I am old, I don't know exactly when I'm going to die. Oh, take your bow, your arrow, etc. Go out into the field, trap for me some venison, make it good in a way that I like it, probably grilled, and bring it to me and I'll eat it. And then I will be able to bless you before I die. Rivka overhears this conversation between her husband, Yitzchak, and Esav, and she goes and she waits till Esav leaves home and goes off to trap and capture some venison. And she calls her son Yaakov and she says to him, I heard what your father said. Listen, bring me go get a goat out of the barn and we'll take it and we'll shecht it. I'll cook it the way your father likes, and you go in and you'll stand in the place of Esav, and you will get the blessing. So Pasuk Yud Aleph. Vayima Yaakov el Rivka ima. Yaakov says to his mother, now what would you have done if you were Yaakov? You would have said, Ma, you sure I should fool Daddy? You sure I should fool Yitzchak? You sure I should try to take Esau's place? No, he doesn't protest on that leg. He says, Esau is very hairy and I am, clean-skinned. Ulai musheni avi. Maybe Daddy will touch me and feel me, and he'll discover that I'm Yaakov, and I will be like a trickster or a liar in his mind, and he will curse me and not bless me. So what is Yaakov saying? I can't go in there and take Esau's place because maybe I'll be discovered. And if I'm going to be discovered, I'm going to get cursed instead of blessed. Again, no protest about trying to fool his father. No protest about trying to steal the blessing that was intended for Esau. The protest is only that maybe I'm going to get caught. So this raises a whole new problem, because in our tradition, we call Yaakov the Ish Emes, the man of truth. Titain Emes, the Yaakov, God says, I've given truth. Emes is Yaakov. The symbol of Yaakov is Emes. Truth. How is this the symbol of Emes? This is the symbol of duplicity. This is the symbol of chicanery. This is the symbol of trickery, of being a con artist. What kind of emes is this? We will deal with that in a future lecture. I just want to leave that hanging. Wanted to point it out to you that Yaakov's protest to his mother had nothing to do with truth, had only to do with maybe I'm going to get caught. Anyway, he listens to his mother. He dresses up with this hairy garment to be able to fool his father. And now let's take a look in Pasuk Yud Ches. Vayovo el aviv. And Yaakov comes in now fully masqueraded as Esau. Vayomer avi comes into the room and he says, Papa. Vayomer hinedi, and Yitzchak says, I'm here, son. Mi ato b'ni, who are you, my son? What does this question mean? Yitzchak has sent off Esau to go bring him some venison. And now somebody comes into his room, his tent, and tells him, hello, Papa. What should he have said if he thought this was Esau? Wow, you got back here so fast. It's good. It smells so good what you brought me. Thank you for listening to me. Let me eat a little bit and I'll bless you. No, he says, who are you? Which means he thinks it's Yaakov. He doesn't think it's Esau. Yaakov immediately understands the drift of his father's question. Vayomer Yaakov el aviv. So Yaakov responds, Anochi Esau, I am Esau. B'chorecha, your firstborn. Osisi kasher dibarti elai, to make sure that Yitzchak thinks it's Esau. He says, I know, you told me to go find venison. I did what you told me to do. Kum no shavav ochla mitzedi, come and get up and eat from my venison. Ba'avur tvarchani nafshecha, so that you should bless me, because that's what Yitzchak said. Go bring me my favorite recipe of a venison, whatever, and I will bless you. So he says, I know what you said. I am back. So he's trying to fool Yitzchak. Vayomer Yitzchak el beno. He says, Mazemi hartalim tzobani. How'd you get back so fast? What's he saying again? He's saying, I don't think you are Esau. You returned too quickly. How'd you get here so fast? Vayomer ki yikra Hashem elokecha. God made it happen quickly. So Vayomer Yitzchak el Yaakov. So Yitzchak is still not persuaded that it is Esau who's standing before him. So he says to Yaakov, Yeshana v'amushcha b'ni, come close so that I can feel you. Ha'ata zeh b'ni Esav imlo. Are you truly my son Esav or not? What is he now saying? Liar, I don't trust what you said. You said you're Esav. I don't trust you. Come close to me so that I can feel if it's truly Esav or not. Are you really my son Esav? Vayigash Yaakov el Yitzchak aviv vayimushehu. And Yaakov comes close to his father, and Yitzchak feels Yaakov, and lo and behold, he says, Hakol kol Yaakov v'hayedayim yidei Esav. My sense of touch tells me you are Esau, but my sense of hearing tells you this is the voice of Yaakov. Now let me ask you a question. If Esau was coming in and bringing the venison to his father, would he have impersonated the voice of Yaakov? Did he have any reason to try and sound like Yaakov? No. He was the preferred son. He was the son that Yitzchak chose to bless. He was the son that was dispatched to bring back the food. Why in the world would he say, Akol, Kol Yaakov? His voice was the voice of Yaakov. What's Yitzchak telling this son that's standing there? You are not Esav. Esav does not imitate your voice. You have a reason to imitate him, so maybe you did something to make me your voice that you're Yaakov. So Yitzchak is not fooled. He knows, or he thinks very strongly. He's almost 100% convinced that the young man that's standing in front of him, although he's not young, he's 60-ish, the man who's standing in front of him is not Esau, but Yaakov. So he says to him again in Pasuk Chav Dalet, Vayomer ata zeh b'ni Esau? Are you my son Esau? Well, now Yaakov has already twice told him he's Esau, and now Yitzchak is again asking him, are you really Esau? What is he saying to him? I don't believe you. And therefore he asks him a third time. Vayomer, he says, and take a look in 26, Yishana ushkola li b'ni. Come close before I bless you and give me a kiss. Vayigash, and Yaakov draws close. Vayishak lo, and he kisses him. Vayorach es reach begodov, and he smells the fragrance of his clothing. Vayivorchehu, and then he blesses him. Why? Because he says, Re'ei reach b'ni kareach soda asher berecho Hashem. Behold, the fragrance of this boy, the young man that's standing, my son who's standing before me, is equal or as same as the fragrance of the field that God blessed. Mysterious statement at this point. What is this field that God blessed? Okay, so now we have a big question. Why would Yitzchak prefer Esau? And second of all, why would he go forward with blessing the son who stood before him when he had reason to suspect that it wasn't Esau that was standing there, but that it was Yaakov who was standing there? And finally, how do you steal a blessing from a blind man? Who cares who's standing in front of him? He doesn't see who's standing in front of him. It's all going to be dependent on his intent. Who does he intend to bless? If he intends to bless Esau, who cares if Yaakov's standing there? He doesn't see who's standing there. It all is in his mind. What is his kavanah? What is his intent? How do you steal kavanah? How do you steal the intent from a blind man? How does Yaakov think that just because he's standing there, he's going to get the blessing when in Yitzchak's kavanah, intent will be to bless Esau? So now we have a whole series of questions. Let's go back and try to unravel this. And where do we begin? We begin back on the opening sentence of chapter 26. There was a hunger in the land besides the hunger that was in the days of Abraham. Now we asked a very strong question. In the days of Abraham was 100 years before this. Of course, it's not the same hunger. What's the Torah telling us? It's not the same hunger. The answer is the Torah is telling us that there's a stark land of Israel and let's say the land of Egypt. Egypt gets its fields watered by the overflow of the Nile. Every year, the Nile overflows its banks and waters the watershed, the area of the Bika, the land that's adjacent to the Nile. And it's a very fertile land and it's watered very well and things grow there. In Israel, there's no Nile. There's no overflowing banks. The only way you can water your field, or the only way you can not only water your field, but the only way you have drinking water is limtar hashamayim tishtemayim. By the rain of the rainfall of the year will determine if you can water your fields and drink water. So the land of Israel is very cyclical. It goes through periods of drought and it goes through periods of lack of rainwater. In fact, in the modern state of Israel, the state meaning it's the scientists of the state of Israel, have solved the problem of a lack of water by desalinating water from the Mediterranean. There are 3 huge desalination plants that distill this water and clean it and cleanse it and make it, purify it so that it can serve as drinking water to such an extent that Israel is able to export water. This is one of the modern miracles of the state of Israel. But before this, there were droughts in Israel. There was hard times. In fact, we are supposedly at the tail end of a drought of 10 years already here in Israel, except for the last year or two. There's been a great shortfall in the amount of water that's fallen in this country. So what's going on? So Avraham Avinu, in the face of this drought, who's a shepherd, picks himself up and runs to Egypt. Why? Because in a drought, the lands, the grazing grounds dry up from the sun without water, and they deplete. And if you don't move on and find grazing ground, your flocks will all die. So Avram Avinu, as a shepherd, is forced to leave Israel in order to survive economically and perhaps even physically, because there is no water. So now, what's going on? What's going on is he's forced to go. Now there's a drought in the days of Yitzchak. He also wants to go. He's a shepherd. We said he had all this cattle and all this sheep and everything. He has to get out of Israel too. God tells him, do not leave the country. Stay put. How do we survive in the middle of a drought when you have these huge flocks of cattle and sheep? So take a look in sentence 26:12. What does Yitzchak do in the face of a command of God to stay in the land of Israel in the midst of a drought? Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi. And Yitzchak seeds, he plants in this land, in the land of Israel. Vayimtza b'shana hahi, and in the very year of a drought, he finds me'ah she'arim, 100-fold return on his seed, a bumper crop beyond any expectation. Vayiborchehu Hashem, and God blessed him. So what does Yitzchak understand? What conclusions does he draw from this? He concludes a number of things. Number one, droughts in Israel are cyclical. Number two, you cannot pick up and leave. If you don't pick up and leave, your flocks will die. What is God telling him? God is telling him to be a farmer. God is telling him, do not rely totally on your flocks. You must also farm the land. And Yitzchak understands that, and he farms the land. In the middle of a drought, he gets a bumper crop. God blesses him and tells him, you're right, Yitzchak. You have reached the right conclusion. Why must you be a farmer? Because, let's say, the Bedouin have traveled throughout, wandered about this land for centuries, and they have not established a civilization. You want to be a patriarch, Yitzchak? You want to be a father of a nation? You want to be the one who teaches your people how to survive? You need to be a farmer, because farmer is the core value of the Torah. What do we have? Peah, Leket, Shikha, Truma, Meiser, Bikurim, Shemitah, Yovel, all of these mitzvos, which we call mitzvos hatluyos ba'aretz, the mitzvos that are contingent upon dwelling in the land, are all agricultural mitzvos. Tithing, giving to the poor, coming to Yerushalayim with the Meiser Sheni, all of these mitzvahs, Truma to the Kohen, observing Shemitah, let the land lie fallow, all of these mitzvahs are agricultural based. And the civilization of the Torah, the society of the Torah, is based around agricultural events. The 3 major Chagim, Pesach, Shavua, Sukkot, all have agricultural significance. And therefore, Yitzchak says, I understand from what God told me that I have to be a farmer, that the future of our people lies in farming. Yes, we can continue to shepherd, but we cannot rely 100% on being shepherds. So now let's go to the wells. Avraham Avinu has wells, all of these wells that he opened up. What did he open up all these wells for? He opened up all these wells because he's a shepherd. And whenever his flock depletes a certain area and grazes until there's no more grass left, he has to move his flock to another area. But how can he move his flock to another area? There's no water. So he had to set up a system of cisterns, trap the rainwater, and have readily available cisterns wherever he intended to move his flock. A series of these cisterns, so he can move his flock around as the need arose, and he would have readily available water. He couldn't go out and try to dig wells that had underground sources of water. That would have taken him months, maybe even years, to establish a whole series of wells that are deep water wells, as we might say. So therefore, he builds a series of cisterns, and he designates these cisterns in strategic places so that he can move his flock from grazing ground to grazing ground and find and have there a source of water that he prepared in advance. Now comes Yitzchak. He opens up all the cisterns of his father because he has a tremendous amount of sheep. And he starts to use those cisterns. Well, the Pelishtim, they don't object to the use of those cisterns. They know that Bedouin traverse this land. They know that they don't make a civilization. They know they're not going to intrude. They're not going to make a land grab because they're just going to keep moving on from location to location. But Yitzchak now has been told that the future lies in agriculture. So what does Yitzchak do? He digs Be'er Mayim Chayim, a be'er that has underground source of water, a continuous flow of water, not a cistern, but a be'er mayim chayim. And in order to distinguish between the be'eros of Avram Avinu and the be'er of Yitzchak, it tells us that the be'er of Yitzchak was a be'er mayim chayim, a deep source of water, spring-fed well. And therefore, the Pelishtim say, oh, you want to dig a spring-fed well because you want to settle here and farm this land? You're not making a land grab by us, and they fight over it. And this explains why Yitzchak abandons the Be'eros of Avram Avinu. He abandons the cisterns. He's got to find a Be'er Mayim Chayim, a source of fresh water that will continuously flow, because now he needs to support his farming endeavor. He needs to build a house and settle. He's not going to run around the countryside anymore. He needs to stay so that the crop can germinate, the seed can germinate, the crop can grow. He needs to weed it. He needs to water it. He needs to harvest it. He first needs even to clear the ground. This is a whole long process. He's not going to move on. He's going to stay put. So the Pelishtim say, you're making a land grab in our country? Out you go. We don't want you here. We don't want you in our midst. Move on. Leave. And so Yitzchak understands this, and he moves to Rechavia. There he digs a deep well, and there he settles. Now, that answers all the questions about the wells. What is the well setting us up for? So now Yitzchak is faced with, he's growing old, and he wants to bless his sons. Certainly wants to bless Esav first. So we ask the question, why would he want to bless Esav over Yaakov? The answer is, what happened with his father, Abraham? What did Avram Avinu do? Avram Avinu had two sons. He had Yitzchak, and tell him, through Sarah, his wife, banish Yishmael from the family. Drive him out. Together with his mother. Okay? So what does Avram Avinu do? Let's first of all say, the Torah tells us, Vayeira Hadavar Ma'od Be'enei Avram Alo Dos Beno. Abraham is terribly disturbed by this command of God, by this demand of his wife, by the command of God to listen to her and drive his son out. He doesn't like that. He doesn't want to drive his son out. So what does he do? He gives him a loaf of bread and a canteen of water. When he sends away later the Bnei Keturah, he gives them Gemalim Molei Kotuv. He loads them up with all kinds of goodies. He gives them provisions. He gives them money. He gives them whatever they need, and he sends them far away. Why doesn't he do the same thing for Yishmael? Why doesn't he give him a camel? Why doesn't he give him 10 camels? He's got tons. He's got a tremendous amount of animals. When he sent Yishmael to go look for a wife, he comes with 10 camels, and they're all loaded up with all kinds of goods. Why doesn't he send Yishmael away with 10 camels, all kinds of goods? It's his son. And he's very disturbed to send him away. Why did we send him away with one canteen and one loaf of bread? The answer is he wanted Yishmael to come back. He did not want to send him away permanently. God commanded him to send him away. So he said, okay, I'm going to do the minimum. I'll send him away. He'll go into the desert for a day or two. He'll sit and think about what happened. He'll do tshuva, and he'll come home. So he only gives him meager provisions because in essence, he wants him to come back. That's just an aside. Now, Yishmael is off in the desert and he starts to die from dehydration. We need to explain that a little bit too, because after all, he's 17 at this point. He is a strapping teenager. His mother is a middle-aged woman. Why would he suffer from heat stroke and sunstroke, dehydration, and his mother's fine? The answer is, he said, I am the cause that triggered our expulsion from the family. Ma, you drink. I'm strong, I'm young, I don't need the water. You drink, Ma. So Hagar drank the water. But the fact is, Yishmael got sunstroke because he wouldn't to drink the water. So he falls sick. We'll talk about that some other time after we haven't already done that. But basically, now we're in the story where Yitzchak is going to decide to bless his son Esau because Yitzchak, is getting very old and weak and he doesn't know when he's going to die. So he says to himself, I have two sons. I have one son who the Torah describes as an Ish Yodea Tzayid Ish Sadeh. Ish, a man who knows how to hunt, and an Ish Sadeh, a man of the field. How is Yaakov Avinu described? Yaakov Ish Tam. Yaakov is a simple man, simple needs. Shevo Halim, he dwells in a tent. Yaakov dwells in a tent. Why does he dwell in a tent? Yitzchak, a very wealthy man. Why isn't he dwelling in the mansion? The answer is he's a shepherd, and he dwells in a tent because he has to pick himself up from grazing ground to grazing ground, and he can't build a house at every grazing ground. He dwells in a tent. Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, in his explanation on the Chumash, makes a tremendous insight. And he says, when it describes Esav, it says, Ish Yodei Tzayid, Ish Sadeh, a man who knows how to hunt, a man who's a man of the field. He uses the word Ish twice. Says Rav Hirsch, Esav had two forces raging within him. One was to be an Ish Yodei Tzayid, a hunter. You hunt, you trap, you kill, you eat. Instantaneous gratification. Ish Sadeh, but he was also a farmer. And a farmer cannot have instantaneous gratification. He has to clear the field, he has to seed, he has to wait till it grows, he has to water it, he has to weed it, he has to wait until maybe a month or two until something pops out of the ground, and then he can first harvest it and grind it and eat it. It's a whole long process. So in this person, Esav, there are two opposing forces raging, one against the other, one for instantaneous gratification and one as a farmer to have patience. Yaakov is integrated. There is no force ripping him in two. He is one personality. Ish Yoshev Oelim, Ish Tam Yoshev Oelim. So now Yitzchak takes a look at his two sons. He has one son who has two tendencies, one to be a hunter, one to be a farmer. He has another son his tendency is to be a shepherd, or his avocation is a shepherd. Says Yitzchak, God has already told me, or indicated to me, that the future lies in farming. So now I have this one son who's a farmer. I have another son who's a shepherd. The future does not lie in shepherding. The future lies in farming. So God is directing me to choose Esau. God is forcing my hand to choose Esau. I don't know why God wants Esau blessed, but for some reason, he's directing me to bless Esau because Esau is my son who has at least one tendency to be a farmer, some tendency to be a farmer. So now let's look at what happens. We said that Yaakov is standing in front of him. Yitzchak has all these doubts as to who's really there, probably strongly suspecting it's Yaakov and not Esau. So he decides to bless him after he smells his clothes. What is the blessing that Yitzchak gives to the young man standing in front of him? V'yitein l'cho Elokim mitala shemayim u'mishvanei ha'oretz. Take a look. It's where is it? It's in Pasuk 28. The text of the blessing that Yitzchak gives to the son that's standing in front of him. And although Yitzchak is confused as to who's there, he goes forward, and we'll direct ourselves to that issue in a moment. But first, let's focus on what he actually blesses. That God give you from the dew of the heavens, from the fat of the land, the rove dagon and much wheat, the tirosh and much wine, much grapes. He gives him an agricultural blessing. He doesn't say to Esau, or who he thinks maybe is Esau, let God guide your traps. Let every trap you set snare an animal. Let every shot you take bring down your prey. Let you be the most successful hunter the world has ever seen. He totally ignores the direction of Esau to be a hunter, and he only talks about farming. That's an appropriate blessing for a farmer. It's not an appropriate blessing for Yaakov because Yaakov's not a farmer. He's a shepherd. So Yitzchak goes forward and blesses this son with a blessing that one would give to a farmer. Why? So let's go back again and study that pasuk. Pasuk 27. Vayigash Vayishak lo, when Yaakov approaches, his father says, approach me so I may kiss you. And Yitzchak kisses him. Vayorach esreach begadav, he smells the fragrance of his garments. Vayivarcheu, that's what triggers the blessing, the fragrance of the garments. Vayomer, and he says to himself, I guess, Rei reach b'ni, behold, the fragrance of my son, the one who's standing in front of me, is kareach sadeh, it's like the smell of the field of Sheberacho Hashem, that God has blessed. What field did God bless? The field that Yitzchak planted in the middle of the drought. The field that yielded 100-fold return on the seed. The great bumper crop in the midst of a drought and a hunger. Lo and behold, miracle of miracles. This is a field that God blessed. Yitzchak smells the field that God blessed. So he says to himself, this is the son that God wants me to bless. This is the son that stands for the future, the agricultural future of my people, the basic foundation of the Torah scheme of civilization, to be agricultural. This is the one that God has chosen. I don't care if I think he's Yaakov. I don't care if he's Esau. God is directing me to bless this child. I smell the smell of the field that God has blessed. What drove me to pick Esau in the first place? Because I think he's a farmer. Whatever son is standing in front of me has that smell of a farmer of the field that God blessed, and therefore he proceeds to bless him, regardless of his suspicions of which son it is. He understands that this is a directive from God. And just like God directed his father Avram to choose him over Esau, he is being directed by God to choose this son over the other son who's not there at the time. And therefore he blesses him. And this answers all of the questions. You can't steal a blessing from a blind man. It makes no difference who's standing there. It makes a difference of what Yitzchak's intent was. His intent was to bless the son that stood before him, because that was the son that represent the field that God had blessed. So what are all the questions we asked? Every question that we've asked has now been answered. Is there any question that's remaining outstanding that I may have overlooked? Please raise it and I will direct myself to it. But this is the point of introducing this whole chapter with the well story, to tell you that Yitzchak, God gave him a directive that indicated the future was to be a farmer, because God told him to stay put in the midst of a drought where there's no grazing grounds. And he understood to be that he had to farm. And when he did seed and 1 second, please. Hello? Okay. Okay, so he's in the middle of a drought, and he gets this bumper crop. He understands the future's farming. He now decides that he has to check. God is directing him to select the son from among his two sons who has a tendency to be a farmer. So he picks Esau. Not because he thought Esau was more worthy, but he thought that God was directing his hand. And now he realizes all of a sudden that God was telling him to bless the son who stood before him. And ultimately, it's revealed to him that his suspicion is 100% true. It is truly Yaakov who was standing there, because Esau comes running in after Yaakov leaves and says, "Hey, here I am, Papa." And Yitzchak says, "Wait a minute. Your brother came and fooled me, and I blessed him. He told me he was Esau 3 times. I blessed him. Can't blame me for choosing to bless the boy that was here because he insisted he was Esau." Says Esau to his father, "Have you not one blessing? Only one blessing, my father?" He says, "No, I have other blessing." And he gives him another blessing. By the way, what is his blessing? The blessing to Yaakov included that Esau would be subservient to him. Says Yitzchak now to Esau, I blessed your brother that you will be subservient to him, but I'm going to put a caveat on that. I'm going to say that you will have the ability to throw off that yoke, and that you will become equal, at least, if not more equal. You will become the dominant force, and he will be subservient. I will give you that blessing. Now, let's just take one step back. Was the blessing to Yaakov ever fulfilled? Did Yaakov ever dominate Esau? Did Yaakov ever have Esau bow to him and be subservient to him? It was one little time in Jewish history later on during the kingdom of Israel where Edom was conquered by the kingdom of Israel, but that was fleeting and very, very, very few years, not a long time. The rest of history is dotted with Esau suppressing Yaakov. So when you get down to taking a bracha that was not maybe 100% intended for you, maybe in the world to come the blessing will become true, but certainly not in this world. We have never really gained supremacy over Esau to the extent that was intended in the original blessing. Esau did not have to throw off the yoke. Esau was never subservient to this yoke. This blessing, given sort of not intentionally 100%, never really took effect. Okay. So we have dealt with this story from the perspective of Yitzchak. And we have answered all the questions of what made Yitzchak choose Esau. We have answered all the questions. Why did he proceed, even though he had strong suspicions that it was Yaakov who was standing there? We answered all those questions. We answered the question of what effect does the wells have on our destiny. The wells had on our destiny to teach us that we need to occupy this land, dig deep wells, make a Torah society predicated upon Truma, Meiser, Shemitah, Yovel, all of the mitzvahs Hatuluyas Ba'aretz. This is our mandate from the Torah. This is the way that we should live our lives. Unfortunately, in the long years of the Gullus, we got disconnected from the land. We must therefore praise our brethren who have now once again entered into the agricultural endeavor, for this is the way of the Torah. This is the way. The mercantile system is not the way of the Torah. In fact, a mercantile contract is not enforceable under the halacha. An executory contract, a contract to be performed, is not enforceable under Torah law. The rabbis came along and said, you should honor your word, you should honor your agreement. It's rabbinic. From the Torah, there's no obligation. If I breach a contract to sell you my house, and you take me to court, and you seek to force me to sell you my house, the halacha from the Torah is no deal. You cannot force me to sell you my house in a court of law, in a beis din. Only midrabanan, the Rabbanan said, if a person breaches his contract, we curse that person. There's a curse that's leveled against that person, a rabbinic curse that's imposed. No specific performance. You, the buyer, cannot enforce that contract. Vice versa. I, the seller, cannot force the buyer to buy my house either, even though he promised to buy it. That's because the Torah system of society is agricultural. Barter, you can enforce a barter agreement. A commercial contract is unenforceable from the Torah. So we've learned a lot about the method of our civilization. We've learned a lot to understand why Yitzchak would prefer Esav. And that's all from the perspective of Yitzchak Avinu. Now we will proceed to look at this story from the perspective of Rivka and from the perspective of Yaakov. Rivka, who induced her son to go in and try to fool his father, and Yaakov, who listened to her and went in to... How do you view this story from their perspective? We in Judaism... Excuse me, go ahead.
Can I ask a question that still belongs to why did Yitzhak Vayecherad Yitzhak Charada Gdola?
Vayecherad Yitzchak Charada Gdola ad ma'od. Let's take a look at that pasuk. That's a good point. I skipped that point. I meant to cover that point too. That pasuk is Lamed Gimel, chapter 27, verse 33. Now, Esav is, what's the context? Esav has returned with the venison cooked in the way that his father likes it. And he walks in, and lo and behold, Yitzchak tells him his brother came and fooled him. Vayecharad Yitzchak Charada Gedola, and Yitzchak undergoes a tremendous trembling, ad ma'od, to his very core. Vayomer mi efohu atzatzayid vayovi ochel. Who is this man that came in and took all and brought me this venison, and I ate it and I blessed him? Gam baruch yeh. By the way, he may have fooled me, or he may have tried to fool me, but he will be blessed. Is that a natural reaction? Let's just say some swindler comes in and tries to swindle you out of merchandise, and he gives you a face, counterfeit money. And he pays you with counterfeit money. Lo and behold, you discover the counterfeit money that you got. You're going to say, whoa, the deal's done. I made a deal. The deal's a deal. You're going to say that? You're going to say, hey, give me back my merchandise. You gave me counterfeit money. You're going to say to Yaakov, that blessing, I'm undoing that blessing. You fooled me. You lied to me 3 times. I don't want you to get the blessing. No. As soon as he discovers that it's truly 100% Yaakov, Gam baruch yeh, so he shall be blessed. I'm not revoking the blessing. Why? We answered that question before. Because he felt that whoever was standing there was the one that God was directing him. So why did he tremble? He trembled because he misperceived Yaakov's true ability to become a shepherd, to become a farmer. And we will see this when we will discuss Yaakov Avinu. How did this transform Yaakov Avinu? What happens to Yaakov Avinu? After all, we in Judaism, we don't believe that the ends justify the means. You can't tell me that I have a good purpose, therefore I can steal, or I have a good purpose, therefore I can kill. You can't tell me I have an altruistic reason for committing sins. The ends do not justify the means in Israel, unless there's a halachic permission to do it. But just like this, I myself should decide the ends justify the means? No way, Jose. No such thing. So now we need to understand, how is it? What are the consequences to Yaakov Avinu over his nefarious, duplicitous, trickster type of behavior? We will discuss that the next time, because that too is a full hour or close to an hour lecture to retrace the steps, the consequences to Yaakov, and how do we understand that the ends justify the means, and how do we understand that Yaakov is the symbol of truth, when he's hardly any symbol of truth until this point in his life. Thank you for listening.